welcome Dr. Edwin Catmull to this conversation. I'm really glad that you agreed to this in this online event. We are able to bring people like you to the ACM India annual event, which will take place on February 13th. The event will open with your talk. But the idea is for the Indian students and broader participants to get a glimpse of you and what you have done and what's the importance of the work that people like you do. So that's the purpose of this talk or this recording. So I will. Okay, now we will start with some questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes,
yeah. So you saw these questions. Is there anything that you're particularly interested in answering right away, or I can just ask some of them and you will answer them?
Go in the order you feel comfortable with.
Okay. Okay, we will start. Congratulations on winning the Turing Award in the last year, along with Pat Hanrahan, another computer scientist, computer graphics expert from Stanford. This is a big moment for some of us who work in computer graphics. Your own contribution to the field of computer graphics. There are multiple things in the early 670s that you could contribute to. One of the key things that you contributed to is texture mapping, which has become such a big thing. And whatever you started as texture mapping has been expanded into very generalized processing at every pixel, bump mapping, or all the other things which are kind of grew out of that idea. So,
as an example, so those were the first things, was to put an image in there, and the work at that time about how you see what's in front or back was on some very sophisticated algorithms, but none of them worked for curved surfaces. So in order to do that, I had to basically invent the Z buffer, which itself is a fairly simple idea, and somebody else simultaneously thought of it in Germany. But I think one of the reasons why it wasn't even thought of earlier was these computers didn't have enough memory to hold an image and the Z buffer. So what I did was I had the entire image and the Z buffer on the disk, and I paged, under my own algorithm, I paged the pieces in and out. So when I made my pictures, the disks, which at this time were, like they're, 2 feet wide by 2 feet deep and 4 feet high, with these platters on them. And when I was making my pictures, the disk was shaking. And I actually broke the disk once because of so much shaking. But there was no other way to do it. I think, Ivan originally wasn't excited about the idea because he was trying to solve complexity problems. And I was, in some sense, cheating because I was getting complexity by mapping images onto them. But I actually felt good about it because it's one of those cases where if a genius professor, and Ivan Sutherland truly is a genius, but if he says something and you know that he's not right, even though I was pretty timid, I actually felt good because, I know this is the right way to go.
So sorry, when I stopped hearing you, you were just saying when this famous professor is saying something is wrong and it's right, that's a good moment. I mean, you can probably continue from there. Sorry about this interruption. We are in this online.
Well, believe me, it's happened with sites that are much closer here physically. So, and the fact that it works at all with India is good. But the net result of all of this was each one of these different areas had a focus. And our focus was to try to visualize it. So what do you do with it? Well, at the time, you could easily imagine engineering uses, architecture, design, but it's still pretty early. We're just sort of imagining what it might be. For me personally, with the very first course that I took, which Ivan taught, since I liked art and animation, I thought, oh, I bet I can animate something. So my first little project was to, by hand, take the points and move them around and turn a little head into a bat and have it fly away. I still have it. It's like a little tiny thing. Nobody's ever seen it. And then the next project I took was to do a little movie of my left hand. Now, the reason I picked my left hand was that it would be very hard. Now, it's complicated enough. There's now some arthritis, there's not as much flexibility as there used to be, but there was no way of animating or modeling. So I had to write a language, I had to write a modeler, I had to create a cast of my hand and digitize it, cover this plaster model with latex and draw polygons on it, and then digitize it by looking through a plastic grid and getting back far enough so that I didn't have a parallax problem. And then do another view from the side to come up with the points, and then hand correcting them in order to make the hand. And then write this language. So this is a class project over 1 quarter. Make the model, digitize it, write the language, and then render it. Now, this was all using shaded polygons. This is before I had a thesis.
How many hours did it take to convert your hand into a model, all this manual process?
You know, I didn't even keep track, but a quarter at Utah was 10 weeks. So I had to do all this in 10 weeks. It was exciting, and it revealed the problems that I need to solve. So this was before coming up with a thesis. And for me, it was to say, okay, the next step for me is to figure out how to have real curved surfaces. And to say initially, when I proposed it, it was to bend the polygons. And I spent a lot of time bending polygons. And I found a lot of problems with the algorithms and so forth. And then until I came up with another approach among many that I tried, which was a subdivision of a surface into smaller and smaller pieces, and then with the Z buffer. But this was all in the environment of the University of Utah providing through ARPA the funding for the students, and then providing very little guidance. The truth was, we didn't see either Ivan Sutherland or Dave Evans very often because they formed a company. So the students were actually pretty much on our own. They gave us the funding, the support, they gave us a kick in the ass when we needed it. They challenged us, tell us when they thought we were wrong. But we basically learned on our own with each other, solving these problems. And that environment helped create a remarkable group of people. So Jim Clark was in that group. John Warnock, who founded Adobe, and which makes Photoshop, he was one of the students. And Alan Kay, one of the founders of object-oriented programming, he was one of the students there. It was pretty exciting. And we each had different ideas about what was important. Jim Clark wanted to do real-time graphics. And that's why that's what led him ultimately to creating Netscape. I mean, not Netscape, Silicon Graphics. He made a chip, the geometry engine, which kind of really started the chips for the purpose of graphics.
Times that you were, all these people together. So I went on Sutherland, E&S, did you work with them? They were in the business of making the big computer, the image generator, or, hardware that will do all these fast. Did the students or you personally work with them?
Well, I didn't do anything with the company. Obviously, I worked with Ivan and Dave as professors. Jim Clark actually worked for them and did chip design because he was into hardware design. Their main business at the time was making simulators for aircraft. So flight simulators, and initially it was more like you land aircraft at night with the simulators because it was easy to have a lot of lights on the airport rather than rendering the airport. It's too complicated. And then one of the students, Gary Watkins, built some hardware. It's this big rack of hardware, which implemented his polygon algorithm so that you could see planes. So they were building hardware. They had a simulator for oil tankers, and they later had a business of doing projections of the night sky. So they were building bigger hardware. And it wasn't until Jim Clark, who had left, he actually came and worked for me at New York Tech for a while. Then he went to Stanford, and because the design of chips was now taking off, he designed the geometry engine, which then became the first chip as the basis for the Silicon Graphics computer.
So the second related
model, and look at it today, and so you've got these incredibly smart people in India, but you also know what the problems are in terms of energy, global warming, agriculture, food, and the students know that those problems are real, and most of them are quite altruistic. They want to make a difference in the world. That's an enormous asset. It's an enormous power. How do you unleash that? And our job as administrators of colleges or universities is to unleash that and let these smart people do great things for the country and for the world.
Great. The second part was the two famous professors disagreeing with what you wanted to do, and you're not deterred by it. You got more energy from it. So this is a good lesson for young students who are starting off, or young researchers, to take criticism, but take it for, in your own way. Any further comments on that?
Well, yeah, the one thing is I was easily intimidated. And so I was never argumentative about it. So if someone didn't agree, like, if a professor said this wasn't right, I didn't argue with them. But at the other side, just the fact that somebody was really smart or in a powerful position did not mean that they were right. Like, it's like, I've always known that. So I didn't feel like I have to be, butting up chest or anything like that. It's like the fact that somebody really smart says it does not make it right. I mean, there was one case where, and it's kind of a funny one, but I was talking with Ivan once, and I was at his house, and I was explaining something about the system that we were using to make polygons look smooth. That's called Phong shading. It's a Vietnamese student. And so rather than the linear interpolation of the texture, which is fairly visible, this was much less visible, but it was still a little visible. And so I made the comment that there was a discontinuity of the first derivative at the edge of the polygons. And he immediately said, no, there isn't. Now, I was frozen. I couldn't think how to say, I couldn't think what to say. I just froze. And he's staring at me while I'm frozen. But he's thinking. And while I'm sitting there completely unable to get my brain together, he said, oh, you're right. So he's so smart, he could figure this out, even though he hadn't been thinking about it a lot. And he said, oh, you're right, continue. And then I could continue with the discussion.
Good.
And by publishing, we were fully engaging with our community. I also believed that if we came up with some, like super secret, someone was going to discover it shortly anyway. And we were so far away from the real goal that trying to keep a secret for a couple of years longer, actually, all I did was disconnect you from the community. Because we did have other people who wanted to make an animated film, but they were secretive. They came up with their algorithms and their approaches, and they held it close to their vest. They came to the conference, but they didn't say what they were doing. And they were playing a different game. They were trying to get to the goal quickly. And I was saying, because Moore's law was well understood, if from just purely from a compute power point of view, we're not close. Don't fool ourselves. Don't waste money trying to pretend we're farther along than we are. Solve the problems. So the game was always, how do we get the best people? And then we get to Lucasfilm, where now we had more money for compute power. Still wasn't enough to make a movie. But the philosophy was, oh, what we're doing is we're trying to get the best people. And we had stayed with that, with Pixar and then with Disney, fully engaged, get the best people because they know they're going to engage in a broader world. And it works very well.
So moving from New York Tech to Lucasfilm, when that opportunity came up, was that hard, or was that a decision was in a snap for you because you always wanted to make use graphics to do animation at big scale that probably possible at an industrial outfit like that? Was it easy decision or was it difficult?
No, it was actually an easy decision. There was one part of it that was a little hard, and that was the man who was funding it, who basically wanted to be the new Walt Disney. So he was funding it, but he didn't believe in the artists or the storytelling. He thought that technology was the answer to the problem. And they did have artists there because they had an animation studio. And he told them that when, Ed and his group get their software working, that he wouldn't need the artists anymore. And I'm thinking, oh, don't say that. Because we knew that it wasn't true. But even trying to explain it, he really didn't understand it. So the only thing that was somewhat hard is that he'd invested in it, but we could never achieve our goal there. So when George Lucas said that he wanted to bring technology into the film industry, and he hired me to be in charge of that group, it was now joining up with a real filmmaker with real credibility in the industry. So the only difficulty was that the fact is, I feel like if somebody's going to put something into it, you'd like them to get something for it. But at some point, you just make this choice because the path we were going on, we could never get there. So I went to Lucasfilm, and the decision to go there, of course, when Lucasfilm was approached me, then that was easy. Went out there, interviewed. I was given the offer and took it, and then went out to California in 1979. And then after that came a film, I think it was The Last Starfighter, where they had some very nice looking computer graphics. No, excuse me, it was Tron, where they had some good looking computer graphics, but they were just bits and pieces. Our calculation at the time, and we did make this calculation, was that in order to make a feature-length film, it would take 100 Cray computers. And a Cray computer at that time cost $10 million. That was not a practical amount to spend on computing. And therefore we didn't even bother. For us, it was, we had to come up with better algorithms. And the state of the art around that time was that you could put about 40,000 polygons into an image. That was it. So when we were at Lucasfilm, we said, okay, we have to rethink how we make our images. So at that point, for all these projects that are going on between the digital and the audio and the video, three of us, Rob Cook, Lauren Carpenter, and I, took on the project of trying to make really complex imagery. And so we did calculations, and the calculation of the complexity that we needed was the equivalent of 80 million little micropolygons. So since the state of the art was 40,000, and you say, okay, we're going from 40,000 to 80 million, the only way you can do that is if you say, I really can't take an incremental approach anymore. I have to rethink how we do it in order to hit these numbers. And there are several things that we needed to solve along the way. One of them was motion blur. So their approach won in our competition. And for me, I always loved that because I felt like the fact that my idea didn't win didn't matter. We all won. That relationship of trying to solve this problem is what actually helped drive it forward. And that was a great time. It's the symbiotic competition where it doesn't matter who wins, you all win. There are two fundamentally different ways of creating content. One of them is that you write a script and then you make it, and then you can never get it quite right. So you take a lot of takes and you shoot a lot and you try things because you've got a short period of time in which to do all the live action shooting. If you make a mistake, it's very expensive to come back and fix it. So the result is that the number of live action films that don't do all that well is actually pretty high. It doesn't have a high success rate, to be honest. But there are some great films that are made for a low amount of money. It's just that the statistics are different in the success rate. In the case of animation, though, we don't make it all at once and then say, well, it's expensive to fix it. We actually make it step by step. This is what makes it different from live action. So what we do is with a film, this is something we learned fairly early on, is that we don't start with what we think is a good idea for a movie. We start with somebody that we think is going to be a good storyteller. That's the starting point. Now, they might have something they want to tell to begin with, but they may have nothing at all. All we want is, are they going to be good storytellers? Are they going to be good leaders? Are they going to be able to figure it out? And so what we do is we'll say to them, all right, would you spend time, a year maybe, and think of 3 ideas for a movie? And the reason for 3 ideas is that, if you're thinking about something and you're trying to solve a problem and you get stuck and you start to bang your head against the wall and you get caught in a cul-de-sac, right? It happens to us all. When we say pick 3 ideas, what we're really saying is as soon as you get stuck, switch to the other idea. And switch the other. So you can go back and forth between the 3. At the end of the year, you present the 3. So then we play this, it's like this unspoken game that actually takes place. Is they come and they'll present to the creative leadership the 3 ideas that they've been working on. Now, they typically have a writer who's worked with them, and a few people in development have been gathering artwork to help inspire them. But basically, when they present their idea, it's some drawings and concept work, which is going to be on one side of a wall. So if you imagine like a rectangular room that will hold maybe 20 people in it. All right, so these aren't big rooms, they're story rooms. And we can hang these boards on the wall where we've got the drawings pinned up or artwork pinned up. And what they'll do is they'll take all the ideas for one story and they'll put them on one wall. And then on the other wall, they'll put the other. And then because there are only 2 long walls, we have to switch to a different room for another wall to have the presentation. Okay, got the picture? So then the following happens the same every time. It's funny, actually. but it's the way it works. And my favorite example was on Coco. So Coco was this wonderful movie set in Mexico, a pretty high risk idea. But the thing I should preface this with is to say that that team of people who are looking at three ideas are not actually looking for the best idea for a movie. They're looking for the idea, the film that the director really wants to make. And when the directors present the three, they will never admit which one they want to make. So they all start off by saying, it doesn't matter to me which one of the three ideas that you pick. They all say it. Well, they've seen this before. I don't know why they all say it, but they all say it. It doesn't matter to me which one you pick. So with Lee's film, we have this half-hour discussion about the one-story idea, and then we will move over to the other one, cover it, so people aren't distracted. We talk about the other idea that he's got. You know, they're both good ideas. But then for the third idea, we have to go in the other room. So we walk in the other room, and the ceilings, the back wall, both side walls, and the tables are filled with Mexican artwork. So without one word being said, I know which movie we're making. And that's what we're looking for, is the passion. Because the fact is, early on, you don't know what it is. And so you need that passion and that drive, because you got a lot in front of you. And it's that passion is the driving engine. That's the most important thing you've got.
So what has been the, among Pixar movies since Toy Story, I don't know how many has been made, has the success rate, that is making at least the cost, covering the cost or more, has it been, what's the percentage compared to the live action movies of the same era?
Well, by the time I left Pixar, there had been 21 films. So that does not include Soul. And Soul is going to be difficult to measure because it's now, and during the time of streaming and COVID. So I don't even know any numbers there, and I'll probably never be told the numbers because I'm no longer an employee. But of the 21, one of them was break even, and all the others were wildly successful. So the average return was really very high on them. Now, we started 22 films. There was one that we didn't finish, that we aborted. So we completed 21 of 22, and of the 21, only one just hit break even, didn't lose, didn't make any money. So the success rate is pretty unparalleled. I think the closest now is Marvel's success rate is actually very high. And those are, wild exceptions to the rest of the entire industry. So in the effects side, that's the problem. And there's still a lot of people who do it. So even if one's entering into a low margin business. And there are people who do fairly well, but not great. Pixar stayed away from it. And we made some commercials early just for the experience, but we never went into the effects business other than the effects in our films. The effects in our films are every bit as spectacular as they are in live action films, except that the special effects branch of the Academy doesn't want the competition from Pixar. So they say animated films don't count for special effects, but they're using our software to make the special effects in RenderMan. Now in the animation world, it's the style that we have for making our films is different than it was at other studios. And I think I believe our success rate was different because our way of making the creative story was different. So while each of those studios, whether it was Blue Sky or DreamWorks, had made some very good films, they also made some films that weren't very good. And this was actually a leadership issue. It had nothing to do with either their technology or their artists. It was a leadership issue in how you develop and support stories which are really hard to tell. So they made that choice, but the group continued off and finished the film. It was an impressive group.
So did you visit these groups in India, or you?
Yeah.
Or
early on, yeah, we went over in probably, I think around 2008 or 9, something like that. We were because and we'd had a contract with a blank. They're in what did we hear? Bombay, Mumbai.
Yeah.
There was and all of a sudden I'm forgetting their name. Prana.
Yeah, Prana. Yeah.
So Prana Studios. And at the time, my observation was in the animation world, the animation community did not communicate very well with each other. And part of that was that on the artistic side, the schools weren't as developed for producing students. So they got the artists by stealing from each other. So it created a dynamic which I did not think was very healthy for the industry in India. I don't know what it's like now, but it had to do with that fierce competitiveness for talent.
I remember talking to the top leadership of Rhythm and Hues, the Indian top leadership of Rhythm and Hues. When they came into Mumbai, they were hoping that they will get great graphics artists and technology and art combined in India, because India is known for technology. But it so happened, in India, the training in these things for students is not very good, and the interest level is not as much as they had expected. So they ended up actually doing more artwork, because Mumbai has a very dynamic Indian movie industry, and their artists are plenty. So they were not expecting to do as much art related work here, but they were doing. This is what their observation about 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I saw. They were also starting, I think it was in Arjuna, which ultimately they finished. There in Mumbai, I forget, because I saw the early work that they did on that. And that was my take on it. It was because the training that people got was actually in companies and not in schools. It altered the dynamics. Whereas in the US and in Europe, there are schools where people are trained and they have expectations about moving into this industry or into the game industry. So it's a different relationship. And it's not easy for everybody to understand that. And the people at Pixar, even though they work really hard to make them look good, they really do understand that if they don't get the story right, then we lose. That is absolutely the most important thing. It's built into the culture. If you don't get the story right, nothing else matters.
I've also heard you talk about about Lexo Junior. After watching Lexo Junior, people coming and asking, is it a mother lamp or a father lamp? I mean, so they have really got into the story, and special effects or whatever graphics is transparent, and that's where you want to be, right?
That's exactly right. They weren't saying how cool that looked or the fact that they used the motion blur. They're asking about the character. But the one before that was also very interesting to me, which was Lexo, Andre and Wally Bee, which has got the bee that flies out and hits the nose of the character, and the character chases them off in the forest. So we didn't have enough time to finish the computing of this film because it was a full color rendered film. But as you're doing the mock-ups for it, it's wireframe. So it's, for the characters, you just see green lines where they are. And we did get Cray Computer to give us some Cray time in order for us to compute it for SIGGRAPH. We still didn't get done. So when we showed the movie at SIGGRAPH, the last quarter of the film switched from full color to just green lines. And then when I talked with people afterwards, because it was a big hit at the show, and I said over and over again, as I'm talking with different people, I said, unfortunately, we didn't get it done and we switched to green lines. And what I found was that half the people I talked to did not notice that it had switched away from being a full color story into just the lines. Okay, that's an important point. That story, even though it's a simple story, mattered more than the defects in the imagery. But let me go back to another important part of this story. This is a very important part of the story, which almost nobody understands. So the first significant computer graphics company was Evans and Sutherland, but they were really bypassed by far by Silicon Graphics. So Silicon Graphics was selling hardware, big machines. And but as we know, we've got Moore's law and things are getting faster and faster, but their money comes from selling these big machines. So they try some experiments where they make some chips from some add-in boards, and their first versions as products were not successful. So they made a decision, a bad decision, which was that add-in boards are a bad idea, and they stopped doing it. All right. Now, if anybody thought about Moore's law and the implication of it, they should know that they're at the beginning of something and they shouldn't judge it by this particular thing. They should learn from it. And I'm not saying this in retrospect. I'm saying at the time it was like, why did they decide it's a bad idea? They're just early. And I believe I know the reason why they made the mistake. It had to do with they make the money off selling the big iron. But the other mistake they made was they bought Cray Computer, right? Which was another, at the time, incredibly stupid thing to do, stunningly stupid. And I'd say a lot of the people in computer graphics, you're just like scratching their heads at the time, like why would this be there? And then again, it has to do with companies becoming conservative when they make money and they don't know how to break off of their bread and butter. Let's say contrast by Steve, who understood what it meant to displace yourself. But the result was a lot of the engineers left. And there were about 50 companies that started making add-in boards with computer graphics chips. And they were trying to differentiate themselves by their software. One of the companies that was formed was NVIDIA, led by Jensen Huang. And Jensen had two ideas, one of them which was very smart, and the other one which was genius, real genius. The smart thing was, he said, I'm not going to try to come up with a better user interface for the graphic standard. I'm going to use the one that the industry has adopted as the standard, and I'm going to fool around with that. So it's just a smart thing to do. At that time, various workstation companies were fighting over Unix, which at the time was, in my opinion, and I think history has borne this out, an incredible waste of time. Well, that's what these card companies were doing. The brilliant thing that Jensen did and NVIDIA did was that they designed their chips. And the way most people design chips, you design a chip, you debug it, and then you sell it. Well, they're putting algorithms in the chip, but not all these pieces worked. So after a 6-month period, if it didn't work, they sealed it off and they shipped the parts that did work. And they kept on debugging the other things until they worked. 6 months later, they released some more things. So they got in this discipline of every 6 months, they were introducing a new, faster and better chip. So the engineers, and they had research engineers too, but the engineers were going to SIGGRAPH and they were learning about the algorithms SIGGRAPH. So they were then putting the algorithms in there because the industry, the market opportunity was with games. Academia and entertainment, that is film and special effects, is way too small to justify the investment in high-end graphics. But the games industry was this $100 billion at the time industry, huge. But then they would make these cards, which we'd put into our workstations. So we'd have faster graphics for academia and in special effects and animation. Now with those faster boards, we could develop the technology and we'd write papers on them, put them in SIGGRAPH, where the engineers would come, see it, and put what they could into the chip. So we had this virtuous cycle of producing more and more power, financed by the games industry, the academic lead coming from academia and entertainment. Although I have to say that the games industry and the others had, there are a lot of people working on the problems, but then they converge on SIGGRAPH, and you'd have this cycle that went on year after year. So the increase of processing speed was actually greater than Moore's law. And they produced so much power that there are people that said, oh, we can use this compute power for something else. So deep learning and neural networks, another idea which had been around for a long time, right? It's not a brand new idea, but it stalled because there wasn't enough compute power in order to make rapid progress. Well, suddenly there's this compute power that's available, and now it's restarted with amazing amount of compute power and this enormous change in deep learning. And it grew out of, which is what most people don't know, out of this cycle of this interaction between these three fields. And now, of course, it's its own field. You couldn't have predicted that when you started. Nobody was in charge. Nobody was telling the other groups what they had to do, nor were they conflicted with each other. It was actually pretty amazing, and it enabled these other industries. So computer graphics, conceived of as, well, that's going to be nice someday to show the images of all the data that we produced, turned out to be one of the most important drivers of compute power driving our modern age, coming directly out of computer graphics. That's why it is important. It's not a side thing, like why is it recognized? It's been a driving factor in the world of computer science. You just have to get all the pieces right first.
I don't know if you have been following some of the later, you talked about deep learning, and today there are this deep fake. You can create fake faces or fake people who look exactly like real people. They are, you figure out how to sample from the probabilistic space the distribution of real people using some humongous network, and you create people who, there's no way to say they are not real people. For all you know, it could be someone living in New Zealand or something, right? And this is like one step beyond animated artificial characters. These are artificial characters, but who could be real, and you could really be fooled. What do you think of such technologies? Its proper use in entertainment, as well as its dangerous uses in elsewhere?
Well, by analogy, if you just look at our data and our passwords and our accounts and so forth, is that there are bad actors everywhere, from criminal behavior to behavior by foreign governments, or not even necessarily foreign governments, by local governments. And that's just with regular computer stuff. So you say, well, okay, we've got the potential for making deep fakes, and it's still early, but you look at it and say it's early. Okay, it's not going to get worse. It's going to get better as they learn more about it. And I also know, just from the studies that we've done, that people's visual abilities actually vary quite a bit. There are some people who, example would be, there was this film, it was a motion capture film that took place at the North Pole, Polar Express. So with Polar Express, for people who have good eyes, which is most of the people, not all, but most people in the entertainment industry who've got pretty well trained eyes, then the characters look like zombies. They look terrible. But half the audience actually didn't see that. They didn't see them as zombies. They watched the movie and they enjoyed it. They saw something different. So there's a visual perception. So there are people who are more easily fooled by it. And I've seen people who everything they've seen with artificial reality doesn't look real at all. But again, we're at the early stages. It's not going to get worse in terms of technology. It's going to get better and better. And as we know from other areas, other endeavors in the world today, that you can fool a lot of people, and if you fool enough, you get away with it. And it is coming. And can it be used by bad actors? Yes, just as computers are being used by bad actors now. And can they do some marvelous things? Yes. And how do we address the ethics? How do we have people care about the ethics? It's a challenge. It's a societal challenge.
So thank you once again. Stay safe, stay strong, and in these times.
Thank you very much.